Be reading from Mark 9, chapter the 33rd verse. Then he came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What was it you disputed among yourselves on the road?" You seated, please.
For some time now, we have been doing a series called Questions That Jesus Wants to Ask You. This series is based on the actual questions that Jesus asked different individuals. He asked those questions to make them face the reality of their situation. He asked questions to probe their faith. He asked questions to get the truth out. Tonight we're looking at a question that really hits all of us, I do believe, in some way or another. Let's look at Mark chapter 9. Let's begin in verse number 30. Then they departed from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know it, for he taught his disciples. Now, his primary mission right now is teaching these disciples, getting them ready to take the gospel to the world. He has roughly 3 years to do that. We're now getting around the 2-year mark in the training. For he taught his disciples and said to them, "The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him." He's making it plain. There shouldn't be a question here. But there is a question. He's being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after he is killed, he will rise the third day. This is not the first time that Jesus had told them what would happen in Jerusalem. What would happen in Jerusalem is just a few months away. And he says, you better get ready for it. Here is what will happen. Verse 32. But they did not understand this saying, and were, circle this word, afraid. They were afraid to ask him. They're afraid to ask him. They don't want to look like the dummy. They don't want to look like they don't understand. They don't want to, be the dunce in the classroom. So they just don't ask any questions. But Jesus will ask a question. Then he came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them. Okay, here comes a question for you. Since you won't ask me, I will ask you. What was it you disputed among yourselves on the road? But once again, these men, these chosen men who would be entrusted with the gospel, they kept silent. Once again, they don't want to be embarrassed. Once again, they don't know what to do, don't know how to say it. So they just say nothing. For on the road, they had disputed among themselves who would be the greatest. Let's look at that word, dispute. We don't normally use that word often in everyday language. What word would we use to argue, to bicker? What were they arguing about? Who was going to be first chair? I'm very fortunate to be on the board for the Arkansas Symphony Orchestra. I love promoting music here in our state. You know what position is the hardest position to play in the orchestra? Second chair. Second chair. Because nobody wants to be second chair. Everybody wants to be first chair. And here these 12 men are arguing who gets to be first chair. Who gets to be number one in the kingdom? I want to talk a little bit about awareness. Jesus was aware of what was going on. His awareness reminded the disciples that Jesus was watching them. He was listening to them. Brothers and sisters, that applies to us today. Jesus is watching us. He's listening to us. The things we say are noted. And that's true. But we often don't act like it's true. Think about the things we say to each other. Could you see Jesus nodding approval? Or could you see Jesus doing this with some of the things we say? Some of the things that comes out of our lips. But more than that, his awareness reminded the disciples that Jesus was holding them accountable. Everything they did was going to be held to their account. You see, it's not just what we say, it's what we do. You know, it's not just the words we say, it's the actions we take with each other, with people that we come in contact with. Jesus right here is forcing them to face the silliness of arguing. It has been my honor and privilege to work with couples for a long, long time. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of couples. Very, very often, arguments is causing a problem in their marriage. What kind of arguments are you talking about, Michael? Well, let me give you a list. Here's a list of some of the arguments I've had to diffuse and try to calm down people from. What's the proper way to squeeze a toothpaste? Do you squeeze it, Clayton, from the bottom or from the middle? How do you load the toilet paper in the holder? So it unrolls from the top or unrolls from the bottom? Who gets the closest stall in the garage for his or her car? Are those important things? No, they're not. Think for just a moment. The last major argument you had with somebody, could be your spouse, could be a child, a parent, a neighbor, a friend, a co-worker. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but if I did, how many of us would be raising our hand and saying, the argument was just plain silly? In fact, when you say words and you get in an argument, don't you wish 5 minutes later you could reel those words back in? Don't you wish there was a delete button and you could delete what you just said in the past 5 minutes? Jesus was forcing these men to face the silliness of arguing. Let's talk about ambition. More than just the fact that Jesus was aware, let's talk about the ambition of the argument. They wanted to be number one. They didn't want to be number 10 or number 11 or number 12. They wanted to be number one. This argument happened 3 times. It happens here. It happens when John and James and their mother come to Jesus with a request. It happens at the end, just after the establishment of the Lord's Supper. We're going to read about that one in just a moment. Ambition itself is a desire to get ahead. We want our children to be ambitious. We want our children to do well in school. We want our children to do well in work. We want them to achieve everything that they want to achieve. You see, ambition can be a virtue, or ambition could be a vice, especially when you mix in pride into the equation. Ambition that is commendable, talking now about religiously, the desire to do all you can to promote the glory of God. That is ambition that the Lord will commend. Well done, good and faithful servant. Ambition that is condemned, seeking to promote yourself, because it is fueled by pride. The pride you have that Satan whispers into your ear. Hey, you want to be number one. You want to be in charge. You want people to look up to you. You want to be in the spotlight. So why didn't the disciples answer? Look again at verse 34. But they kept silent. They knew they were wrong. How many times as parents do we sit down with our children, they've done something wrong, and we ask them, why did you do it? What caused you to do that? What were you thinking of? And how many times do they just stare down at the floor? Because when you know you're wrong, you don't want to face up to the music. When you know you're wrong, it's embarrassing. These disciples who had spent all that time with Jesus, they had heard the lessons, and they knew they were wrong, but they had done it anyway, because nobody wants to be second chair. Now, the admonition. Jesus will admonish them. Let's look at verse 35. And he sat down. When Jesus sits down, get ready for some teaching. He sat down. He called the 12. Hey guys, circle around. I got a little something to tell you. He called the 12 and said to them, if anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. Jesus' response was direct. He's not pulling any punches. He is getting to the core of the problem. You want to be first, you've got to be last. You've got to be a servant. Then he really takes it up a notch. He makes it dramatic. He took a little child. He set that child in the midst of them, and when he had taken him in his arms, can't you picture Jesus just hugging that child? The warmth, the love of the Lord that he had toward children. Then he says, whoever receives one of these little children, in their culture, were children important? The answer is really not really important. Children were a heritage. Children were something you wanted to have, so you have a heritage, you'd have generations after you. But you really didn't command any authority. You didn't really command any place until you got older. So little children were kind of kept away from the spotlight. Don't bother the teacher. Just stay away. You don't want to bother the adults. Jesus was not that way. He said, whoever receives one of these little children in my name receives me. What you do for little children, you're doing it for me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. We're not just doing it for Jesus. We're doing it for God. We today are the hands of the Lord, because Jesus has no hands to minister to the needy, to help the poor, to help those who are outside, who need to be brought into the family. Jesus has no eyes to see the need. We are his eyes. We are his arms. We are his feet. We're the ones who go for him. What we do, we're doing it for his glory, serving him. You know, Jesus did not teach in the abstract. Let's go to that third example of this one problem, because Jesus taught by example. Luke chapter 22, verse 24. Now there was also a dispute. Once again, got an argument. Oh, back up. Did you notice what was happening in verse 14? Jesus is instituting the Lord's Supper beginning in verse 14. This is just hours away from his arrest, his trial, his crucifixion. This is a very intense moment. And here we have his disciples, those men that he has trained, and once again they're arguing who is the greatest. Now there was also a dispute among them as to which of them should be considered the greatest. Once again, I want to be first chair. He said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. But not so among you. That's not the way we're doing it. That's not what I want. Not so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he who governs as he who serves. For who is greater? Okay, let's just talk questions here. Who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? It is not he who sits at the table, yet I am among you as the one who serves. This observance of the Lord's Supper takes place during a Passover meal. Jesus was the host at that Passover meal. Being the host meant you don't serve. You're in charge. But what do we see Jesus doing? Jesus gets up, wraps a towel around himself, and goes and does the lowest job you could do at a meal. And that's wash the feet of the people at that meal. Jesus was teaching by example. He was trying to get across to them one more time. The greatest is the last person, the least person. Don't be arguing. Don't do that, disciples. So what? Practical applications for living today. Let me give you two big ones. And this is what I get from reading this text. Application number one. None of us is too big to be a servant. Every one of us is a servant. I'm thinking right now of a children's home associated with us, the Church of Christ. They reach out and take care of children who are abandoned by society, abandoned by their biological parents. They have nowhere to go. And every year they award a little towel that's printed, has something printed on it. And you can put it on your wall. I have one. They award what they call the servant's towel. If you'd done anything for those children that year, if you had served as a guardian, if you had served as a tutor, if you served as a big brother or big sister, they gave you a little towel to show their appreciation. You know, that's what a servant is all about. It's being willing to put that towel around us and get down on the floor and wash the dirty feet of everybody there. That's application number one. We all should be servants, where none of us are too big to be a servant. Number two, do arguments help? For the most part, they don't. For the most part, emotions get the best of us. Words are said that we would normally not say. And hurts and pain are created. There's 3 rules that I share with all of my couples. Number 1, we do not communicate. We do not say a word unless we're calm, cool, and collected. We just don't. If your husband, if your wife is trying to egg you on and try to get into argument, if you're not calm, you're not cool, you're not collected, you don't say a word. Number 2, we talk about the Give Me 5 contract. What's the Give Me 5 contract? The Give Me 5 contract is simply this. Anytime in my marriage, if my wife wants to have 5 minutes to talk and me not interrupt, she can have it. Why 5 minutes? Because usually when we're getting ready to get into an argument with somebody, what do we do? We escalate it. He says this, so she has to say this, and he has to get her back to say this, and then she's got to retaliate and say that. And you end up, you're thinking about what bomb can you launch, what missile can you launch with your next chance to say something. So 5 minutes, you're just going to sit there. You're going to sit there and you're going to listen. Because we got the Give Me 5, we got the 5-minute contract. Give me 5, give me 5, give me 5 minutes. And let me listen and let you present your case. Number 3, Jesus is watching. Just like Jesus was watching those disciples, and he was aware of what they were saying, he was aware of what they were doing. Jesus is watching us. When we go to the bedroom, when we go into the secret place in our house, and guess what? It's not a secret to the Lord. No room is off limits to the Lord. He is there with us every step of the way. Let's keep that in mind. If we keep that in mind, what change would take place in our relationships, in our marriages, in our family? What changes would take place if we truly realize that Jesus is watching, he's listening, and he's going to hold us accountable for everything we say, everything we do. Tonight, are you a Christian? I look over here, I see people that I deeply and dearly love. I see Christians. But maybe you're not a Christian. Will you believe? Will you repent? Will you confess? Will you be baptized? Mark, just write those verses down. And if your Bible is like mine, I have what's called a red letter Bible. Those words are going to be in red because those are words from Jesus himself. If you are a Christian, maybe you have said things that you should not have said. Maybe you have done things, you have been associated with things that you should not be associated with. Do you need to seek forgiveness? 1 John 1, verse 9. The church stands ready to pray with you and for you. James 5:16. Bill's got a song to encourage you. Will you please come as we stand and sing for your encouragement?